Thank you for joining us. I'm Jason Nazar, the co-founder and CEO of Comparably. Very excited and honored to have Marissa Andrada, the Chief People Officer of Chipotle, with us. Thank you for being here right on the dot of 1 o'clock, 1 p.m. Standard Time. We're going to give this just a minute or two and let more people join in. We're going to have a very large group of folks here today. This will be both an online fireside chat, but also open to Q&A. And so if you'd like to be able to ask Marissa a question, please go in the Q&A section of the Zoom software and put in your question now, and we're going to try to get to as many of these as possible. So thank you for all of you that are on here. Marissa, we already have a couple hundred people on, so lots of excitement. And I was just so happy in getting to know your team and you. You're a Southern California native like me, and so let everybody know where you're based out of right now.
Oh gosh, well, I'm currently sitting in my home in Newport Beach, and good to see everyone. How are you? And Jason, so good to see you. I am a native Southern Californian. I was born and raised in East LA, actually. So Alhambra, Mount Washington, for those who may know those neighborhoods around Chavez Ravine. And then we moved to the suburbs. Upland, California is where I went to high school. And so most of my life has been in Southern California. Now, the last 13 years have been traveling around based on my career and where the companies have been. But right now with Chipotle, having moved from Denver back in 2018 to both Newport Beach and Columbus, this is where I am. I'm in the Noop, hanging in the Noop at the beach.
Yeah, and we'll go over your background in just a moment for folks. But one of the things that is just so amazingly impressive is just the host of organizations where you've been an HR leader. So Starbucks and GameShot and PepsiCo and Universal Studios. It's just been a really amazing career that you've had at so many incredible organizations.
Thanks. Yeah, I think, I don't know if it was luck or planning. I think it might have been a little bit of both, especially growing up in my career. I think one thing you'll learn, Jason, and for those who are watching who do know me, what I've always been drawn to are consumer-facing brands. And the challenge is, how do you unlock and stage the company for growth? And so I've been really fortunate to have landed in both startup, but also just big brands to help companies do that. And so I know we'll talk a lot about that. Yeah, but I feel so fortunate to have had that experience and to learn from so many amazing leaders in those brands.
Great. Well, why don't we go ahead and officially get kicked off and started here. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. I'm Jason Nazar, the co-founder and CEO of Comparably. We are a platform to help companies with employer branding, recruitment marketing, and an employee review site where you can see how organizations are rated by their employees. Great organizations like Chipotle that have fantastic reviews, and encourage you to go on there. And my background is that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started and sold a couple different businesses, an active investor and board member in a lot of companies here in Southern California. And this is now actually the 70th one of this series that I've done. So yeah, it's been 8 years that we've done this series, Marissa, where we've had amazing business leaders like you come on and really just talk about their journey, their experience. And so thankful and honored to have you here today, and would love to turn it over for you for a background on yourself, and then we'll jump in and get started.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, hi everyone. Good to see you. As we started, I'm a native Southern Californian and sitting here in Newport Beach, having a conversation with all of you. My career, fortunately, but not by planning, has ended up in business and human resources and people. While I didn't study it, I think that's what I landed into. And just to kind of fast track it, I love human resources because it is a strategic part of the business. At the end of the day, what I learned early on back at PepsiCo is that a company can get really good at identifying kind of long-term objectives and short-term objectives. But at the end of the day, what I'm most curious about is, how do you make sure that people actually accomplish those objectives, whether it's long or short? And I'm going to give all my secrets now, and then we can talk about it. The secrets are really a few things. One is, do you have the right leaders in place who can inspire and motivate an organization? Because I think at the end of the day, culture is a reflection of leadership. So making sure that you have the right leaders in place to drive those objectives. The second thing is that, are they creating a culture where employees are inspired and motivated to get all of that done. And then third is you have the right people in the right place. And so I learned that super early on in my career after my graduate program at Pepperdine, which I know you and I have in common. And I really carried that with me. And the path to the rest of my career, I think early on, I wasn't sure that human resources was a track. I learned that it was and committed to it because I found that it was strategic at Pizza Hut and at PepsiCo. And I just told you all the strategy secrets around people. But then I found myself the back half of my career, I think similar to you. I mean, I think for me, I needed to go do the startup thing. And to me, I was always wanting to be part of something ground up. And while Universal Studios was not a startup company, it certainly was for the trade of human resources. And so I've had the chance to actually help be a pioneer in people practices in a place where there's traditionally a professional HR person, and then worked at XDrive, which was Internet 1.0, and now I'm really dating myself. But I think about these consumer-facing organizations where they are at that point in their growth, where they're positioned to get to that next level of growth. And the biggest unlock to that is around people. And one thing that I always talk about is you cannot grow a company unless you grow the people. And so I go back to those three tenets of the strategy of HR, and that's what I've really been drawn to. And I think the other thing too with these consumer-led companies is that they're also founder-led. So when I think about Comparably and what you do so well is really help people not inside these companies get a real flavor for culture. And what I love about founder-led companies or founder found, and then they're handing it off to that next leader who's going to take it to that next level, is that there's so much heritage in what starts with a founder, and how do you preserve all of that, but also continue to help the organization grow and not forget like where you came from. And so I think about, my career has really been in that back half of helping organizations that are founder-led, consumer-facing, getting ready to grow, and the unlock is people. And I'd say the last thing is, for those of you who are in the trade of human resources, I think it's tough when you're the first real professional in human resources, with the exception of Starbucks. I mean, I joined a bunch of very smart HR people there, but actually helping the business really navigate that. And so I think there's a challenge of bringing that profession and that trade, but also meeting the organization and the culture where it's at, and trying not to speak the HR nerdy language, which is so easy to do. So that's a little bit about like my background. I mean, the brands where I say the founder-led is, we talk about Red Bull being a brand that I was a part of, GameStop, and I joined it at a time when the founders had just purchased their biggest competitor and overnight doubled their size. And then we doubled that company from a $5 billion company to $10 billion. I ended up at Starbucks at a time when they were coming back out of their turnaround. And how do you sustain the behavior of sustainable performance and profitability? And then from Starbucks, I had the chance to join Kate Spade when the brand was growing internationally. And then we ended up selling that brand, and thankfully it got me to the path to Chipotle, which I've been thankful to, meet our founder, Steve, who he's still very much a part of the foundation of our company, but it really joined after Brian Nichol, our CEO, joined. And so just a quick background on my career and on how I think about the world of people, business, and HR.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing career. We all have a lot to learn from you today. And so this is, again, for everybody joining us, please go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom webinar software, especially if you're an HR professional. This is such a unique opportunity to get to hear directly later on from Marissa. So in the second half of our talk here, I'm going to open this up to Q&A. One of the things I loved reading about your perspective, it was just how you talk a lot about leading with kindness and that being such an important value. And obviously our session today is leading with compassion. You've got this philosophy of, hey, how are you? Leadership and management. Can you talk a little bit more about that, but also talk about how that actually drives business results? And it's not just something that, is a feel good, but can actually be something that can help improve the performance of an organization.
Okay, yeah. Hey, how are you? Or what's going on is typically what comes out of my mouth when I run into people that I know, team members that I work with, or even new people. So when we are pre-COVID, and many of us are in the office, or even while on the phone, the first thing I'll say is, hey, what's going on? How are you? And I think when we don't know each other yet, most employees are like, oh my gosh, do you really want to know what's going on? And to me, the actual answer is yeah. Like, what are you excited about? What are you working on? I always want to know what really motivates our people, our employees, and why they're excited about what they're working on. And so to me, there's that. I think too, there's a piece around, the end of the day, I know it's business, but I also think it's personal, right? We have human beings working in the workplace, and there's no better way to understand that we're human than to connect with people one-on-one, to really understand what it is that they're interested in, what they're excited about, what they're working on. And I also think about the piece around kindness. Maybe they don't want to talk about what they're working on, and maybe they have a point of view and something that's really bothering them, or an idea that they have that might help the organization. I think when I know I start that way, it just paves that way to building that relationship over time, one-on-one with individuals. And I think that's how you keep it real in an organization. I think about how does that drive business results? Again, I think the leadership team that we have, it's not just me. I think there is a personal nature to how we relate to each other. And as I listen to our employees, they all sit back and say, wow, so this has kind of been a reset at Chipotle. There are a lot of new people who joined the organization over the last couple of years. And when they look at the way the leadership team interacts with each other, it's just like, wow, you guys are just real with each other. You have a lot of fun. You also all have a lot of chops. But the fact that you're so accessible and talk to each other in that way, and also engage with us in that way, just makes us want to, bring our best forward, bring our best ideas. So, and I think when you create that kind of environment where people can really feel like they can be their true, authentic, full selves, I think that unlocks and helps to bring the best out of everybody, because it's kind of that foundation. Unless you have that, how can you expect to unlock potential out of people unless they feel like they can be their full selves?
I love that.
Yeah.
So, I think you've got a fantastic culture at Chipotle. You've been at all sorts of organizations, ones that were amazing, I'm sure ones that needed, more work than others. At an organization as big as Chipotle, and where employees are, sometimes obviously working in the restaurants versus corporate employees and having different experiences, how do you cultivate a really positive culture? What are the actual action items that you try to lead so that across all those different employee experiences, that there's a world-class, culture that you're building?
Yeah, I think I feel super fortunate to be part of a leadership team, with Brian Nichols, our CEO. One of the things we did early on, and for those who followed the story of Chipotle a couple of years ago, we decided to do a hard reset on our transformation for growth. And part of that reset was making that big decision to actually move our restaurant support center, from Denver to where it was for 25 years to Newport Beach and to Columbus. And part of that was a culture reset. Early on in our culture reset, we felt it was really important. I felt it was important that our leaders knew that too, that let's get really clear about who we are and what we stand for. And, at the foundation of Chipotle is our purpose of cultivating a better world. And if I think about how other companies need to think about it, get really clear on your purpose and why you exist. And so it really starts there. And for us, our purpose has always been around cultivating a better world. And it's been about food with integrity and making sure that that value chain of, like our suppliers, our farmers, everyone into that process, that we're providing real food to and great access to our customers. But I think that food with integrity also translates to people with integrity. People always talk about Chipotle is such a sustainable organization. And I say, yes, we are with our food, and we should be as well with our people. So a sustainable organization means that you have the opportunity to regenerate and be in a place where you can grow. And so the first thing was, all right, get really clear on a purpose, as well as codify the values for the organization. And so early on in our journey as a leadership team back in 2018, we took the time to have a day, we had to do it pretty quickly, where we looked at all the artifacts of our history, understood all the language and everything that had come before us in 25 years, and spent the day and facilitated a conversation around what are our values. And so we left a day, and it was actually on the eve of our 26th anniversary. We were in the basement of our new location having a conversation about values. And we came out with some draft values. I would say there were probably 9 of them. And then the task from there was, let's go engage our employees, starting in the restaurants, to help them, complete the values with us. And so even doing that, before you even say, here are the final values, the fact that our hourly employees, so we engaged about 300 or so employees, starting with our crew and our managers in the restaurants and our general managers, and then we brought it to field leaders and team directors. So we brought it to that audience to get some feedback from them. And then we brought it to the team who we know were moving with us from Denver. And we facilitated many conversations to ultimately get to our 4 values, which are: the line is a moment of truth. And if you think about that amazing, beautiful food line of real, safe cooked food for our guests, it's really that front line and of course our digital line. And then the experience we're creating for our people, whether it's our employees or our guests, that they're having an amazing experience. The second value is teach and taste Chipotle. There was a lot of detail around our classically cooked food. The fact that you can show up at 6:30, 7 a.m. in the morning, and we don't open until 10:30, and our employees are cleaning and chopping onions, making the, frying the tortilla chips. The fact that all of that is happening, there's a lot of detail behind that. But it's also a metaphor for, we need to be able to bring people along in this culture. So Teach and Taste Chipotle is about, as we bring new folks or as people move into new roles, how do you make sure they feel successful and that you bring them along? The third one, which I always talk about, is authenticity lives here. Our food is real and so are we. We want to create an environment where our people can be their full selves and bring their best. And then lastly, the movement is real. We believe we source better ingredients. We believe we hire better people. And that what it is that we're doing around culture of food, I think has really been groundbreaking. And I think Steve Ells has really set that, the culture of fast casual, fresh prepared food is really started by Steve Ells. And I like to believe that this movement we've created as leaders is how you treat people at the same time. So the movement is real. And so it's kind of the staging of, I really hope that leaders take that to heart, that when you are trying to drive growth and grow an organization, it really starts with being clear about who you are and what you stand for. And then that becomes the lens for everything else. We hired people who love our purpose and live our values. Every decision we make for the company, and especially during these times, is through the lens of our purpose and values.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Actually, I'd like to dive in for a moment because I think it's really not only fascinating, but valuable to a lot of folks. So you started off with 9 draft values,
Yes.
And then you took that to your team. Can you just talk a little bit more about the detail of what happened afterwards? And how did you get from those 9 to the 4? Because I think there are a lot of folks out there that have tried to go through a similar process where maybe some more executives or a smaller group started off and they share it with their team. But it doesn't always go, I think, as organized, as smoothly as maybe as it did for you. And so what were the specifics of how you got that feedback that other organizations could learn from?
So one of the parts of the people experience team, so human resources in our company is called people experience, is our training team. Our training team already had folks who came from the restaurants. And so they took those 9 values, and there was a lot of language and detail behind those 9 values, and actually went out into the restaurants and found times to have conversations with employees to say, hey, the new leadership team is trying to figure out, what of all of this language makes sense for this company? And we want you to take a look at it. So they would share the information. They distilled it. It was down in 9 pages. I'll kick it real and say it was these Microsoft Word documents. There was a statement at the top and then bullet points, right? There could be 5, there could be 15 bullets explaining that sentence. And what our team members did in training and people experience is that they went out and spoke with all of these crew members, and they just kind of voted on what really resonated for them, right? Here's what makes sense to them in their world and how they experience their job, their company every day in the restaurant. And so there was that vetting where then those 9 values got down to 6 values. We were able to get some pretty plain language. Here's what this means to our crew members, our service, our KMs, our GMs. And then we brought that back to the field leader. So that took a couple of weeks. The team was on the ground in the restaurants. They spoke to about, I don't know, 125, 150 hourly team members to talk about that. Then we brought it to our field leaders, same thing. They created WebEx webinars where you can get 30, 50 people in a room, send a pre-read ahead of time and say, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Their wheels are already spinning, same thing. So you get to these 6 and they give you feedback on, it's not this language, it's that. Here's what really makes sense and why, and they're giving examples. And people are taking notes on that. And then we took that, further refined 6 with now, instead of 5 to 15 bullets, to like 2 or 3 bullets, right? Explaining those 6. And then we brought it to our above leadership team. So our team directors, I remember this vividly. This was back in August of 2018. And we had a meeting, you know, our chief restaurant officer had a meeting where he invited me and my team to come up and talk about the values. And so we presented all of it with, you know, 100 people or so in the room. And then there were a lot of questions, a lot of feedback. We collected all of that and then synthesized it down to like 5. And so from there, our leadership team, after not seeing it for 5 weeks, you know, after going through that process, and it is about having just really good team members who know how to synthesize information, you know, whether they put it on spreadsheets. I mean, it was interesting how the team just synthesized it on their own, like what are the key themes, what's popular, what language resonates. We brought it back to our executive leadership team, which is the CEO and all the direct reports, and then said, all right, does this make sense? And then we got it down to 5. And then we ended up just partnering with our CMO and our copywriters. So if you think about all the copy that you see around Chipotle, and our copywriters took a stab at it. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, we got to that copywritten stage, and then our game time moment was, it came back to the ELT. And quite frankly, you know, what I love about working with our CEO, with Brian, is that he is so hands-on. And there were just a couple of pivots on the language, which really made it ours. And so I think over the 6 or 7 week period, we got, you know, all of these values down to a place where, you know, here's our purpose of cultivating a better world. Here are the 4 values and the 1 or 2 statements to describe it. And I think what also really helped us was we were getting ready to have an all manager conference. So it happens every other year, where we bring in all of our managers from around our 2,600 restaurants, you know, and then our leaders from international. And it was a reset for the organization. And our entire conference was really around cultivating a better world and bringing these values to life, whether, you know, it was a marketing presentation, a people presentation, et cetera. We were able to really circle back with everyone and really unveil it and experience the values, not just through, hey, everyone, here's the values, but through a 2.5-day experience, really live what that means. And so if you have the luxury of doing that too, where it's not just, okay, here it is, let's publish it. It really was unveiled through the experience. And then following that, I would say a month later, once we got back to our restaurant support centers and the offices, then there was an email that came out from Brian, you know, to our restaurant support centers, just saying, hey, thank you for your input. Here's our purpose and values. You know, and then I'll just take it one step further. In the restaurant support centers, since there are people who moved from Denver and there were new people coming into the organization, you know, they already felt that good vibe when they met people like, I could really work here. This is amazing. People are really open. They really are interested in what I have to say. Love the startup vibe, et cetera. I remember when Brian sent out those values, not even a week later, I sent out an email, and specifically in the subject line, it said, let's rally, ! Let's live our values and create community, and sent out an email to everyone in the organization saying, hey, we would love your ideas on how we live our values and create community across our locations. We're having a meeting, anyone's welcome to come. And I remember the executive leadership team saying, let's let people volunteer. If they want to be involved, great. If they don't, great. And so let's see what comes out of that. And it was amazing to get employees. I remember our first meeting, as we were still staffing, you know, in Newport Beach, we had 30-ish people, 35 people in the room. And then same in Columbus, I remember WebExing into that. Same thing, 35 or 40 people in the room. And there was anywhere from, hey, this is my second day at the company, and I want to be part of this and helping to shape the culture, or I've been with the company for 15 years, and here's what I love about our values. And so that really became the impetus for how we make sure that we are creating an environment that is co-created with our employees, and again, grounded back in the values. So, I mean, I can go on about that. There's a whole seminar around that. So,
yeah, I think that was incredibly helpful. I think it's a model a lot of organizations can use. I want to talk about your journey for a second. And I was reading an interview you did where you talked about how very early on in your career, you had this kind of seminal moment where, you were maybe a little bit more shy or hesitant to speak. You
yeah.
were often the youngest person in the room, and you had a manager that said, look, you got to put your ideas forward because you've got great ones. And it kind of changed how you thought about it. You have a career trajectory, Marissa, that I think a lot of people would love to have and are trying to figure out, well, how do I have that? And so what are the things you feel like you did along the way that were different than your counterparts of what helped you get to the position you're in today? And also similarly, what are some of the things that you see folks do that gets in their own way? What are the ways in which they limit their growth over the arc of their career?
Wow. Okay. That's a great set of questions, and let me see if I can answer this. The first thing is, gosh, very early on in my career, I think about Cliff, I think about Tom, and they were the leaders who said, gosh, you really should say more in these meetings. Like, you have a lot to contribute. And to me, it's a confidence thing. I think about my entire 20s, when I was 20 years old to 30 years old, and again, a lot of this has to do with company cultures as well. The companies that I was a part of, there was a profile, there was a way you needed to dress, a way you needed to speak. And it was almost like, here's how you fit in versus here's how you truly be you. And I think that was my own self-confidence around, well, can I be me, or do I need to sound exactly like the people who have way more experience than me? And I think that was the hesitation. And I wish that someone early on inspired the confidence in me to say, well, yes, there is a profile and competencies for this culture. You can still be yourself. And I wish I had known that early on, because that's advice I give to people, which is, look, be really clear about who you are and what you stand for, what you're passionate about, and make sure that you gravitate to something you want to do in your career if you want to get paid for it, like that you're truly passionate about what it is that you do. And so, and that there is no one else in the world like you. And so just lean into that. That's what I love about innovation. Innovation happens when you put people with different thinking, different backgrounds, different upbringings, you name it, different industries. Amazing things can happen when you bring people together that have different thinking. So think about the role that you have if you don't have confidence, and back then I didn't, to truly innovate. Because, wow, you're not allowing people to innovate by not bringing your good thinking. So there's that one thing. And I think one thing too, which I don't think is usual for human resources, it might be now, but I think earlier in my career, there's a couple of things. There's the tactics, but then there's the relationship part of it. I think the tactics part is that, look, my parents raised me to be a medical doctor. They thought I was going to be a doctor when I grew up. I'm not, but I did love math and science. I nerded out fully, and I started off as a biology major, but fast forward, moved to business. And I've always had a curiosity around two things. One is, from a business standpoint, how does a company make money? So if you were to roll the marble, and I like saying that a lot, whether it's a service or product, from the very beginning to the very end, what is that process that a company goes through to actually make money? I think that's always been an orientation of mine as a business professional. I think the second thing too, that has always been an orientation, has been this notion of process improvement. Now it's called lean, or, and whatever you want to call it now. Back then, it was process improvement and total quality management. And I've also been fascinated about, okay, the process, how do you look at the areas where there might be waste and get ideas from people to improve it so that you can speed up the process to make money, right? So those are the tactical things that I would give advice to. If you haven't already oriented, especially earlier in your career, I really encourage you to think about your business in that way. When I think about the relationship side, to know the business is also to know the people. And so when I think about the process by which a company makes money, whether it's a service or product, I've always been curious about why people show up every day and do what they do to be that part of the process. So early on in my career, I worked in a tech company, and it was a software development team. And I remember being an HR associate where I answered questions on benefits and training and all of that. But I remember self-inviting and showing up to meetings with project managers and like, well, Marissa, we're not talking about benefits. It's not open enrollment. There's no training that needs to happen. I don't know what you're going to do at this meeting. I'm like, I just want to understand what it is that you're working on. Well, we're developing this piece that goes into this hardware. Great. Can I just sit in and observe it? Right. And so they're like, all right, great. So that observation of, God, what got them fired up? And even in something as fun as software development, like, why are they doing that? And so I think understanding the relationship side of the process of delivering the product, are people motivated to do that every day? And then I think the other piece is, I always share this lesson learned until I went to go work at Universal Studios, which was entertainment. And I remember Jeremy Eskenazi, who was our head of talent acquisition for the theme parks. At the end of week one, he was so fired up. I knew him in my network, and I went to go work for a mentor of mine. And he's like, Marissa, we're so excited you're here. We love your energy. We love your ideas. But here is the deal. You speak a different language. I'm like, what do you mean? I speak English. Like, what are you talking about? And he said, you speak corponics. And so I had to unlearn all of the corporate jargon. And by the way, all of the HR jargon that got in my way. So if I think about, Universal Studios at the time that I joined was growing second gates, growing theme parks. And the problem to solve there was, how do you replicate this management structure so that you can move them to Florida, or you can open up a second gate in Florida, or you can move to Madrid or to Japan and Osaka and open up these theme parks. And we had to do basic things like, well, how is our talent? How do we grow our talent? How do you assess performance? How do you assess for potential? How do you develop people and accelerate the development so that we can then move these managers to the locations and then they can rebuild these theme parks? And to start with, hey, let's talk about performance management with a leader who's never really had an HR partner before. They're like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. So instead of saying, and that's one example, let's talk about performance management, how we're going to do that. It's really about, tell me about how your people know what they should be working on. Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that you are aligned all the time? How do they know when they are successful? So really breaking it down. And I think about that is such an important lesson. And thankfully I had it earlier on in my career, that the relationship piece too is meeting people where they're at. And while you may have knowledge, and I thought I was, hey man, I've worked in Fortune 50 HR, right on, I can bring all of this knowledge with me. Yeah, but no one's going to listen if you can't relate to them and meet them where they're at and speak their language. And so I think that's another piece of advice I would give, especially for us HR peeps, on this call. So important, because I find myself occasionally nerding out and I have to catch myself.
Yeah, so let's, you're a mentor and have been over your career to hundreds of people in HR. So going back to that second part of the question, and let's make it specific to HR professionals. What are the things that you see, what are the areas that you see folks in HR go off track or potentially limit their career growth? Where are you seeing those missteps, and how do you try to coach people to avoid those kinds of things?
Yeah, so one of the things that I see with earlier in career HR professionals where they go off track is they've learned a great process or people process or system at another company. I'll just use that as an example. And they're like, this is so great. I want to take this to my next company and literally cut and paste it, take the same exact thing and ground it into the next company and go, well, people don't get it. They're not adopting it, et cetera. And I'll even take it a step further. There's a round table of leaders who are mentors of mine that I've kept in touch with ever since I worked at PepsiCo, like still going 15, 20 years later, I still speak with them. And I remember like they were later on in their career and they're now CHROs of, brands that you would all recognize. And I remember one woman saying, well, my CEO just doesn't get it. And I'm like, well, what does your CEO not get? And she's trying to introduce a succession planning process, right, for her company. And so she's explaining it, and it sounded uncannily exactly like the one at PepsiCo, part one. And part two was, I finally just said, well, maybe you don't get it. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm like, What I mean is, I think he wants you to help grow the company, but maybe you're not explaining it in a way that he's going to understand it. And it's twofold, not just explaining what succession planning is, but really identifying what problems are we trying to solve in the business. So, wherever you are and wherever your business is, like really grounded in how is the business trying to grow? What are the biggest problems they're trying to solve? And then what are the implications for people? And so you've got to tie it back to the business problems to solve and then layer the people component to it. And I think the early on mistake that I know I've made and that I've seen other HR people make is like, well, here's this really neat solution that I think we need to introduce to this company without understanding, hey, where's the business at today? What problems are we trying to solve? What are the implications around people? And then from there, what tools in my toolkit, what knowledge and experience do I have where I can add value in solving that problem? And I think part of the early ways that my team was, when my team was coming on board at Chipotle and we were resetting and building a new people experience organization, we sat with our leaders, we looked at all the data. We have to do your homework from a business standpoint and understand, okay, what are the biggest problems to solve? And it's really about, well, our problems to solve is we're trying to grow more restaurants. We're building new restaurants, we're growing, et cetera. With the new marketing, more people are coming, better access through digital. So at the core of all of that, and that's like, of course, would take a few hours to get through it. What we quickly saw as patterns were, how do we create stability at our general manager level so that we can continue to serve more customers digitally, so that we can continue to grow more restaurants. And so that's the one thing I see early on. People just don't get grounded in, all right, well, what's the company trying to do? What's the business trying to do? What's the problem to solve? And where is the people component to it? And again, I wish I'd known that earlier on, but hopefully in the teams that I support, especially at Chipotle, but also at the other brands, helping our teams, figure that out so that it's not a secret.
Yeah. I'm going to turn this over in just a little bit to the Q&A. We have a lot of questions. So again, thank you for everybody putting your questions in. Please make sure to put them in the Q&A section. If you put them in chat, we most likely won't be able to get to them. So put them in the Q&A. The last question I have for now, Marissa, and then I'm going to moderate, what's coming in from the group. And there's a lot of them. So you have a lot of really engaged folks here. You're at an amazing organization that is purpose-driven in Chipotle, tied into social good. It's not always like that where, HR has the benefit of a fantastic business and leaders that are already focused on, living amazing values. If you were in front of talking to the CEOs of all Fortune 1000 companies, and you were going to give them your best advice for how they can align their business objectives with HR, and so help leverage HR to achieve those business objectives, but as importantly, what they need to do to drive positive, engaging, meaningful company cultures. What's the advice that you would give to those leaders?
Wow. I think about this all the time about CEOs and the partnership that they have in human resources or with their human resources leader. And I think it just, again, it starts with the CEO. So if I'm speaking to CEOs, I would ask you a bunch of questions. And the first question is what do you stand for? Why is it that you're doing what you're doing? Why do you love being the CEO of this company? What energizes you around that? And really listen to that. Because I think that motivation is innately human. There's what is the intrinsic value of what you're doing? It's not advice, but it's a question that I ask. And then I would then follow it up with, and what do you expect from your people? So what do you expect for yourself? Who are you and what do you stand for? And then how does that kind of translate to this company? Because at the end of the day, I also need to say this, you can't be a successful HR person if you can't understand what's motivating the leader that you're partnering with, the CEO, what's most important to them. And so helping them articulate them, helping them just get clarity around, all right, in order for me to do X with this organization, here's what I envision. Helping pull that vision out is really important in terms of what's most important to them, what is their purpose, what are their values? Because ultimately it starts at the top, right? And then I think informing what the values need to be, how we get leadership alignment around how we're thinking about the company, I think is really important. So the advice I would give is, again, be clear about who you are and what it is that's most important to you, your purpose. Why is it that you're doing what you're doing right now? And then how do you help the organization understand that? And I think that's the role that your HR partner, your people partner can help you, bring to life. I think the other piece of it is it's personal. I say this all the time. Yeah, I get that it's business and businesses are making money. At the end of the day, hopefully there's some good social good and you're also bringing some goodness into the world, which I also hope. But at the end of the day, people join people. I think you all know this. And so don't forget that there are human beings and that they are pouring their heart and soul into this company, whether or not you know it. And so the advice I would give leaders is don't forget that. And how do you make sure that when you are sharing your vision, that it's not only about the what, it's about the how and the why. And that it is about capturing the hearts and minds of people to help kind of bring to life this vision that you have for your companies. That's the role that your HR partner can play with you.
I love that. Sharing the how and why of your vision along with the what. That is as quotable as it comes. All right, we're going to switch over to Q&A. Marissa, we have a lot of questions here. And so I'm going to ask that we go through, we'll treat this as a lightning round.
Sure.
So we'll keep the answers a little bit shorter here, just so that we can answer as many folks' questions. And so again, folks, put your Q&A in the Q&A section, please. So Jose asks, how do you measure that your company is living up to the values that it has, and what tools are you using for this purpose?
Oh my gosh, there are so many ways we can measure our values, both internally and externally. Externally, Jose, I'll have you take a look at our website. We just published an update to our sustainability report. So if you think about our sustainability report, and it's there are specific measures around, how we partner with our farmers, how we treat our people, how we work with our supply chain, and we also measure progress against it. So that's one example of how we actually are reliving these values externally and internally, and look at the measures attached to that. I think you'll learn a lot just even looking at our reports or the updates to our reports. Internally, for HR people, obviously a way you can do it is through your engagement surveys or pulse surveys, whatever it is that you do in your company. And we began to do that. We've never done an engagement survey at Chipotle for a broad audience. We did that for the first time last year. And of course, our values were squarely at the center of that. And not surprisingly, although surprisingly with our engagement partner, they were just astounded by the benchmark that we had off the charts around people who love our values, who love our purpose. And so I think that's an internal way that you can take. So that's our benchmark, which is really high and a little concerning for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, we started really high. But then we also can measure against that over time. I think that's an objective way to look at it in terms of internal measures.
Thanks. Vivette Henry asks, how do you get your leaders to lean into diversity and inclusion?
Oh, wow, Vivette. So leaning into diversity and inclusion, again, when I go back to meet people where they're at, I think it's about, for leaders, what is it that they're trying to solve? What are they responsible for? What are they trying to accomplish in this next year? And then how do you unlock really good thinking to solve that problem? So when I think about diversity and inclusion, are we creating a space where everyone is allowed to bring their voice into it, bring their thinking to it? For my team who is listening, I know this is one of my favorite questions, but one thing I always love asking a group of people, whether it's my team or others in roundtables, is, hey, we're working on this. What else should we be thinking about? What have we not thought about? So I think it starts there. And when you start practicing that becomes creating an inclusive environment where then you realize, oh, I need different backgrounds and people to help me with this. So I would start there.
From an anonymous attendee, how do your managers help their employees be their best selves?
Oh my gosh, dear Anonymous, there's a lot around there in terms of helping managers with tools and capability to help employees be their best selves, right? So first of all, are we selecting the right leaders in the roles? So just let's assume that's a given. Secondly, there are some people tools that we've introduced into the organization around performance conversations. So one thing that we introduced early on was, hey, 4 times a year, let's make sure we're having a conversation about these 4 questions. And the 4 questions are, what did I accomplish in the last quarter? How did I live the values? Looking forward, what do I need to accomplish? And then in what area do I need to grow and develop? And I think when you have an intentional dialogue about that at least 4 times a year, at minimum, that is a good tool for managers to lean on to make sure that they're helping their employees be and bring their best selves, to the office or the workplace. We've done that too in the restaurants where it's 4 questions 2 times a year. And it's amazing when you have that one-on-one conversation where managers care enough to spend the time to do that. So that's the first tip I would give you amongst many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So another question comes in. It says, great to see another Highlander. So you got some more alumni.
Oh my gosh, that is like Upland. That is OG.
And they ask, what are you doing to help keep customer-facing folks focused during the quarantine?
Oh, keep customer-facing folks, so our employees focused.
Yeah.
So one thing that happened before we went into this pandemic was this amazing culture of food safety here at Chipotle. So for those of you who've been Chipotle fans for a long time, yes, we had some food learnings that happened back in 2015, which coming out of that, we created a food safety council, have created world-class food safety protocols. And so going into this pandemic, a best practice for us in our food safety culture is always a wellness check. So if you're an employee in a restaurant facing the front customers, before you even work, it's really about only work if you feel well and you feel safe. And so there's this thing called a wellness check that every manager on duty asks every employee on the way in. There are specific symptoms that we look for, which we don't want you to work. We've incorporated the COVID symptoms as well. So it starts with the wellness check, and no one works well, not feeling well. So there's that. I think our protocols around just hygiene in the workplace, washing our hands, wearing gloves, et cetera. One thing that we always talk about is going into this pandemic, our restaurants are one of the safest places to be because of our food safety culture. So you think about the air filtration system in the restaurants, which people don't really realize that the company went through and kind of figured that all out back after 2015. And then all of our great food safety protocols. If you were to talk to employees, and we recently did some Zoom calls with our general managers, and they're just like, well, we were already doing all these things, which now a lot of companies are trying to do to make sure that they feel safe. I think they feel safe because of just our commitment to food safety, which is also our commitment to people's safety, and overall wellness. So it's our continued protocols, and being diligent about it. So it's not like it's a new practice, it's just continuing forward, our culture around food safety and cultivating, our best selves in the workplace.
Yeah. Erica asked a question here that I think a lot of folks are dealing with, which is, how do you handle leading culture when leadership, C-level and VPs, aren't promoters? Mine barely attend company events, virtual, in person, pre-COVID, which I feel has an effect on employee culture. How would you help push culture with minimal upper management support?
Oh gosh, well, I think you need upper management support. I know I've said this early on in our talk, that culture is a reflection of leadership, and it's got to start at the top. And so if you're telling me, Eric, that there are culture activities that people are showing up to that maybe non-managers or, are only attending, culture is not just about, hey, let's have this party or let's have this activity where everyone can network and get together. What I would recommend you do, and if you're the head of HR or if you've got a leader in HR, I would go back to your most senior leaders in the organization and ask them, what culture means to them and what is it that they want to be creating, because it has to come from there before you start setting all these activities. And so that's what I would do. I think about our own culture at Chipotle, the good news is we're always learning. We have this environment of we have to look back and learn and apply it for the future so that we can continue to grow. It's this whole notion of how we co-create a culture. It's not people experience. That's what we call human resources here. Doing things to people. It's inviting people to be part of shaping what it is that we want to be. And so I think it's inviting the leaders, getting their ideas on how, what culture activities do you want to see? What culture do you want to be part of? So it's engaging them.
Love that. Yeah. Kevin Winston, our friend, asks, for new employees, what new skills are you looking for, especially digital skills?
Oh my gosh, for new employees. So one of our biggest growth platforms over the last couple of years has been the digital space. So for those of you who have your phone and you got your Chipotle app on, we're looking for people who can make that experience of ordering your food as intuitive as possible via our app. And so we're looking for, app dev folks, QA folks, you name it. That is a big growth area for us. And we are hiring, by the way. And so please send in your resume if you're interested in becoming part of our growth for digital. I mean, that's just where our business is at. We provided a lot of access pre-COVID, but of course during COVID, to our great food through our app and through our website.
And we'll drop here in the chat the link to their career site. So if you are interested in working at Chipotle on the corporate side, or if you know folks that are, please go ahead.
Yeah, help us out. We need all sorts of digital talent. I love it.
Yeah. So Javier asked, to that point, how has talent acquisition transformed at Chipotle?
Wow, talent acquisition's led by a leader by the name of Mike Miller, who I've known for quite a while, a long time in my career. And it's transformed quite a bit. When I first joined the company, there were a lot of recruiters sitting all around the country. And when we reset the company, we just decided, let's just locate everybody in the same place, because there's a beauty in collaboration and having people all work together. And so I think that's the first transformation. It's less than half the people we started with, and putting people who actually have recruiting or talent acquisition as a profession and a trade, together. So I think that's the first thing that's transformed. I think the second thing too is actually having a talent acquisition strategy was really helpful. I think when we were dispersed and there were many people, they were kind of at the whim and doing whatever that region needed. I think having one aligned strategy to solve the biggest problem, and for us, you can't be everything to everybody. You've got to go where the Pareto effect, right? Where's the biggest bang for your buck? And for our talent acquisition team, it was focusing on our general manager level. How do we create stability? How do we hire the best managers? And then also, how do we help each other as we're staffing up? Because we've also hired a bunch of new people into our restaurant support center. So having a strategy around that has been really important. And, don't be afraid to ask for help. I think when we were still new and still building our team, we set up a great diverse set of external partners, to help us source and recruit great talent.
There's, I think, an important question from an anonymous attendee.
Yeah.
How do you speak to HR's role during a crisis?
How do we speak to HR's role during a crisis? I think the role is really about making sure that we have the perspective of our people, right? I think during this specific crisis, we're all learning. No one has ever gone through anything like this. So it's recognizing that, but also recognizing that everyone has the opportunity and they should have the opportunity to experience every emotion during this time. And so the role of HR is to help leaders understand that. I know certain leaders have an idea of when we return back to the office, it's going to look like that. I think the role of HR is, that adage of keep calm and carry on. Recognize that there's all sorts of emotions going on. Help keep people calm and focused on what they have control over, and always help the organization communicate exactly what's going on. I think that's the role that HR can play, starting with being the voice of our people, but also making sure that the organization is communicating and as transparent as possible to what's going on, and then helping employees understand here's what you have control over, focus on that. right? Because there's does no good to spend a lot of energy when you have no control over things. So that's the role that HR can play.
Maria asks, do you use any personality profiles like DISC or Gallup? How do you help different personality types work well together?
So there's a couple of things that we're using now in the last couple of years, DISC being one of them. We introduced it a few years ago in our Cultivate You program, which was focused on field leaders. We've brought that now into our restaurant support center. So DISC is a really popular tool to help understand differences and leverage that. Another one that we're working with now is Gallup and the Clifton Strengths Finder. And so how do we help people lead with strengths? We've begun to introduce that. We were getting ready to do that for all of our general managers at the company, and then COVID-19 hit, and so our conference is on pause, but it is also a very popular tool to help leaders really bring the best out of our people and live our value of authenticity lives here. So it's those two instruments that we know we're using pretty consistently in the organization.
Yeah, and I just want to show everybody for a moment really some of the objective data here on how great the Chipotle culture is. So this is your own employees that have left thousands of ratings here on Comparably. It's fantastic scores, stands out as a top organization for women, for people of color. Obviously, Brian's got amazing scores, no surprise there. We got just a couple minutes here left, Marissa. I really want to turn this back to you. And again, we've got a lot of HR professionals on here, executives, folks that are just employees at companies of all sizes, startups and large Fortune 500 organizations. What's the most important advice you feel like you could share with folks during a time like this? And I always like to try to ask, what's been some major mistake or something, you learned from in your career that you try to pass forward on to other folks?
Oh my gosh. Well, we've talked a lot about, early mistakes made in my career, which, I won't repeat those again, but I would talk about the importance of being there for other people, especially during this crisis. I think there's something to be said about checking in with people and not only understanding what it is they're working on, but just how are they doing? I think during this time, it's so important to do that. And when you think about the connections, relationships you have with people, now more than ever, my advice to you is that you are doing that, because I think in the longer term, you will get more out of the work that you were doing together, that you're taking the time to check on human beings that you're working with. I think it's that, I would leave it with that. And also, I think about every decision that we've made throughout this crisis has really been about supporting our people and making sure that they feel safe, they feel supported to continue to work and support our communities. So during this time, don't forget to ask the question, what is it that I can be doing? So you personally, for your company or your team, what can I be doing now to better support the people around me? For us at Chipotle, it's the restaurants, but also it's the teams that we work with. That's the advice I'd give you now. I think sometimes early on in career, it's about what I'm doing, what I'm contributing, what is it? But I think you need to flip it internally and just say, how do I better support people? What can I be doing differently to help others? And, I will leave with, I'm a big believer in karma. The more great energy you put out there, it comes back to you and it comes back to the people around you in spades.
Well, I think that you have a lot of karma points saved up over the years for all the good you've done for a lot of people. And especially today, I can tell you everyone here learned a lot. And you really reminded me, especially in times that are tough and difficult, lead with, hey, how are you? Like before going into other stuff, just start with that personal element with your team, with your customers. When you got on this session with us a little over an hour ago, that was the very first thing you said. So I can attest that you live those values. And this was incredibly thoughtful and gracious of you to make the time in a busy schedule in a difficult time. This is a challenge that we're all going through together, and to have businesses and leaders at companies like Chipotle that lead with mission and values and social good as well as business profits is really amazing. And you've just been awesome. So thank you so much, Marissa, for all your time and advice today. And I know it meant a whole lot to a whole lot of folks.
Well, so much fun, Jason. I've really enjoyed it. And let's do this again sometime. So much fun, dude. I love it.
Exactly. Next time we'll do it in person. Everybody out there, stay safe.
Yeah. Be well, everyone.
Yeah. I hope to see you in a Chipotle line soon in the not too distant future.
Right on. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Be well, everybody. And thank you again, Marissa.
Take care. Bye, everybody.